in these situations where privileged people stand to lose something by standing in their truth, I think that's really important and worth paying attention to. Can you ever just feel drama before it even occurs? Like, no one's talking about this yet, but it's only a matter of time. Like, discourse senses, tingling. That's kind of where I'm at today with regards to Hailee Steinfeld. So I'm sure you're thinking, why? Like, when has Hailee Steinfeld ever gotten herself into some mess? To be clear, it has not happened yet. There have been no draggings and lashings yet. Because at the time of the recording of this video, we are still a few days out from the release of the movie Sinners, which Hailee Steinfeld has a role in. Sinners is a kind of horror, suspense, supernatural film directed by Ryan Coogler. As for the plot, I have watched these trailers multiple times. I still cannot tell what the film is narratively about, but Hailee Steinfeld does play the role of Mary in the film. And I haven't seen too much chatter about this, but I do think it's interesting that Hailee Steinfeld was cast in this role. Let me tell you why. Quote, for the first time in her career, Hailee Steinfeld is portraying a multiracial character whose identity reflects her real-life background. This comes from a write-up in Blavity. Blavity, for those of you who don't know, is a Black American-centric news outlet. Blavity also did an interview with the full cast, but specifically spotlighted Steinfeld in the scope of this interview. Let's see what she had to say.
And Hailee, for you, I saw you spoke recently about how working on this project allowed you to connect with some of your own family history that it kind of not really surfaced for you before and kind of recontextualize all of that. So I want to know the process of doing this film and how that kind of helped you with that journey.
Similar to Woomi's in the sense of it sparked a lot of questions for me. It's always so fun. The research for the job is always the best part, right? One of the best parts. And a lot of times you're learning about something that, you know, you may know a little about or nothing about. And you make discoveries about yourself through those things, but it's not about you, right? It's about something that you're learning, something else. And with this, it was my family. The research was my family and my family history. A lot of times it didn't feel like, again, research being part, like the best part of the job, didn't feel like part of the job. It felt like these amazing conversations that, like I'd mentioned, easy to say I wish happened sooner, but I'm so grateful that they're happening now. And even after seeing the movie last night with just some family, it's like the conversations about this movie are so important. But it brought me so much closer to my mom and to my grandfather. And yeah, I mean, this role, my imagination ran wild with thoughts of what his life might have looked like growing up, what his parents' life might have looked like, and I'm just so honored to be a part of this story. This served me in a way that I didn't know I needed so bad.
So as a person of multiracial experience myself, I did find myself gravitating a little bit towards what Hailee had to say, but maybe for different reasons than others. So to be clear, the character of Mary in Sinners is supposed to be, I guess, white passing, but does have this black ancestry that figures into her storyline. Hailee Steinfeld, best I can tell, is of a multiracial experience composed of European, Jewish, Filipino, and African American heritage. Now, Hailee Steinfeld was a little bit off my radar in terms of her acting career. I knew her more for her music career, but she has had a couple high-profile acting roles as well, and she is pretty well established within Hollywood. However, she is not at all a player within Black Hollywood, certainly not to the extent of her director Ryan Coogler or her co-star Michael B. Jordan. And that specifically is the part that I find interesting. And that's that when you think of a multiracial actress, her name doesn't necessarily come to the top of your mind. Certainly not in the way that it does for your Zendaya, Tessa Thompson, or Alexandra Shipp. So when Hailee is recapping her experience and her family's story, I think that is done very, very intentionally and very carefully. To me, it's almost as if someone either on her team or on Ryan Coogler's team kind of gave her a heads up and let her know that this might be a little bit of a minefield to get into. Like, it might cause a little bit of controversy depending on how she answers these questions. Specifically when it comes to the notion that Hailee could be claiming this identity or experience that people don't think belongs to her. Outside of Hailee specifically, these conversations are happening more and more today as we get into the politics of representation. Specifically, this notion that the characters in any given work and the actors that portray those characters should align in terms of their identities. I mean, we know this by now, right? Like, otherwise Scarlett Johansson's name wouldn't be such a punchline when it comes to this topic. So I think it is really significant that they cast Hailee Steinfeld specifically for this role that appears to take place in a segregated southern USA environment, and that they didn't cast somebody that was more entrenched in a Black Hollywood type of a space. Because what's interesting in these types of conversations is that we might normally ascribe Hailee Steinfeld's casting as them trying to put in a little bit more of a mainstream Hollywood name and attach it to this project. Whereas I just don't know if Hailee Steinfeld has that much name recognition to really have that effect. Again, I think she's phenomenal. I just don't know if that dynamic is present here. And for all intents and purposes, Steinfeld seems very personally connected to this role and this character. So I guess, right, the question is, what do celebrities and public figures owe us when it comes to their family stories? What do they owe us in regards to how they experience racialization? And I say racialization and not racism very specifically. Everyone in the United States is affected by racialization. Racialization being the process by which people are identified by their phenotype into belonging into a specific race. And especially for multiracial people like Hailee, this dynamic of racialization is going to affect her specifically because she might not neatly line up phenotypically to an assigned race role. And especially in the context of the United States, where we tend to see race first, this could be a big problem for Hailee moving forward. In the sense that if people feel like she is claiming an experience that they don't think belongs to her, then a lot of dragging will commence. There are two potential pain points here. One being if Hailee seems to claim an identity that people don't think she is able to claim. And two, if Hailee were to speak on this topic in an inarticulate or clunky way and potentially offend people that were looking for her to give the right answer. Now, subjectively, to me, Hailee Steinfeld does look visibly mixed or multiracial. Without prior knowledge, I would not be able to pinpoint exactly what Hailee Steinfeld's heritage and admixture is, but I can see that something is there. She's got something going on, as we like to say. She doesn't appear all the way white. And I really wonder how this shook out, specifically when she was being raised by her parents. I know this is highly Twitter brain to examine a picture of someone's parents and guess exactly what their experience must have been like for their entire life, but here we are. This is a picture of Hailee Steinfeld with her parents, Peter and Sherry. So again, to be clear, Hailee's non-white ancestry does come from her mom's line. To me, with no context, the parents both appear more white. So I do kind of morbidly wonder, like, what was their experience like when Hailee was born and they saw that her phenotype was more ambiguous? Did they think about what it was going to be like for her specifically? I broached this conversation already in my Are Wasians the New Tragic Biracials video. Please go check that out if you haven't already. Essentially, parents in these situations don't always think to front load these conversations. And from what Hailee is saying, it seems like her mother more alluded to this, and it was known to her mother and known to Hailee, but it still wasn't a prominent part of their day-to-day life or conversation. What's more relevant here is that I don't know that Hailee Steinfeld has ever come out and said, I am X or I am Y. A couple years back, she actually did a video from Wired that was answering some of the most commonly Googled questions about her. She did not answer any questions about race or ethnicity, which I find odd. I feel like there would have been Googled questions about her that would have come up, but it did produce this clip, which I thought was really funny.
Is Hailee Steinfeld vegan? I am not vegan. I have quite a few friends that are. I'm all for it. If you are vegan, I fully support it. I think that's great.
The question remains, though, as to whether or not Hailee does need to definitively say, I am X, specifically if she's going to star in a role. On one hand, parasociality is very real, and I don't think that Hailee owes us an explanation or a full deep dive into how she personally defines her identity. On the other side, though, it's almost as if this ability to opt out of identifying as anything is a little bit symptomatic of white privilege. Now, can I categorically say that Hailee Steinfeld's life experience adds up to a life of experiencing white privilege? No, not up for me to say. I think it's fair to say, though, that neither her or her mother have ever really experienced anti-blackness. I do wonder, though, if whatever identity or definition Hailee Steinfeld lands on, it's still going to upset some people no matter what. And yes, you can't please everyone. No one can. I'd be willing to bet, though, that Steinfeld has seen a situation unfold like that of Kelsey Asbill and really want to avoid that at all costs. Asbill has portrayed indigenous characters in films such as Wind River and TV shows such as Yellowstone. Now, Asbill self-identifies as indigenous indigenous but is not enrolled in any indigenous nation in the United States, leading critics to ask whether or not it is appropriate for her to portray an indigenous character and whether that should or should not be counted as representation. So my guess is that Steinfeld is at least a little bit privy to some questions around her casting and this issue. If not for this role in Sinners, then potentially for other roles she's had in the past. And in particular for her portrayal as Kate Bishop in the MCU series Hawkeye. So Hawkeye premiered in 2021, but the casting of Steinfeld in the role of Kate Bishop had been kind of floating around for a few years before then. I guess the short version of it is that Kate Bishop is canonically white, but a lot of fans had headcanoned her as Asian. Ryan General writes, "It is worth pointing out that Kate Bishop was never depicted in the comics as an Asian woman. While her ethnicity was never referenced in the comics at all, some fans might have assumed her race due to the art styles used on her in the different titles she appeared in. And because Steinfeld is neither fully white nor fully Asian, this upset people somehow." Now, I don't believe Steinfeld ever commented on or even acknowledged this controversy, but I get the sense that she is up to date on some of these cultural conversations. For millennials and Gen Z like myself and Hailee, semantics tend to matter. I personally believe that it is very important to locate yourself in the scheme of things as we think about advancing the struggle for Black lives and Indigenous sovereignty. And while I don't think Steinfeld is thinking about it quite like that, I do think that she is thinking about it at least a little bit, with the caveat that Steinfeld grew up in California and has been involved in Hollywood from a very young age. It's almost giving a little flavor of the controversy that Meghan Markle underwent back in the day. I've mentioned Meghan before on the channel. I'll leave a link to my video about her in the description. When Meghan of Sussex, formerly Meghan Markle, married Harry and married into the British royal family, semantics really did come into play then. Ergo, for her as a biracial woman, was she the first black royal or the first mixed royal? Now again, with Meghan, I don't particularly see white passing, although I'll cop that maybe she styles herself in this more Eurocentric way. But with Meghan, most of the discourse revolved around her clunky response and answers to some of these questions that were being lobbed at her. Really, she just kind of can't catch a break, but that's a subject for another video. When it comes to Steinfeld in this instance, I can think of one other personal narrative that kind of corroborates this whole situation, and that would be the cautionary tale of Shan Boodram. Boodram, among other things, is a psychologist, intimacy educator, and podcaster. And the Shan Boodram lore is so fascinating because a lot of people's first introduction to her was when Lonnie Love referred to her on The Real as a white woman, when in reality, Boodram is of mixed Indian, African, and European descent, with heritage from the Caribbean nations of Guyana and Dominica. And kind of like Meghan, when Boodram speaks out about this, it tends to generate a lot of controversy, specifically when she claims any one or all of her cultural identities. In Boodram's own words.
So, $1,000,000 question I get asked somewhat frequently is, Shan Boodram, do you identify as being black? Yes, I am mixed with black, proudly mixed with black. Well, Shan, do you identify as being Indian? Yes, I am mixed with Indian, proudly mixed with Indian. Shan, do you identify as being white? Yes, I am white. I am mixed with white. Yes, I obviously am white. Look at me. I obviously have Eurocentric features and I'm mixed with white, but in my lived experience, that's just not how I was culturally raised. And as I've grown up, I definitely have access to the white community and have friends, but that's not like the predominant way that I socialize. So I say that with a stutter because I may not understand what it means to be white or the experience of whiteness in the same way that I do experience and understand blackness from the perspective of my culture and Indianness from the perspective of my culture and my upbringing. So that's the short answer of it. I often see comments on YouTube with people saying things like, well, Shan doesn't identify as black, so we have to keep that in mind. Or she doesn't identify as Indian, we have to keep that in mind. We have to always keep in mind that like she can't fully be trusted. And a part of that may come from my own trepidation of not wanting to step on toes. But I have to acknowledge that I can't change the fact that I am black. No matter how much you don't agree with that statement, it doesn't change my lived experience, doesn't change my genes or my biology. Doesn't change the fact also that I am Indian and I am white, etc., etc., etc.
So I get the sense that Steinfeld really would not be prepared for some of the conversations that, let's say, Boodram has encumbered. Again, there's no way for me to look at Shan Boodram and not see a woman of color, but others disagree apparently. Really, if anything, this just illustrates the lack of discursive space that multiracial people have, but I'm gonna get carried away if I go on that tangent. Instead, I want to put it this way. In a situation where white passing people, or otherwise white people with a non-white ancestry, are fully claiming these experiences and potentially losing privilege because of that, isn't that what we want? Especially when it's not done in a particularly performative way, but just in a matter of fact way. Especially when we consider that the white passing paradigm can't apply here, especially if we know for a fact who Steinfeld's ancestors are. She is not shying away from this at all. Now, there is a very bad faith interpretation of these events, which is that Steinfeld kind of leveraged her non-white ancestry to get this role. I just personally don't see that as being the case. But in these situations where privileged people stand to lose something by standing in their truth, I think that's really important and worth paying attention to. Now, I don't know the racial demographics of Hailee Steinfeld's audience, but I hope that this can start a conversation about any roles that multiracial people can or have access to in Hollywood to begin with. Now, I'm not a film buff, and I really don't have any answers to this in its entirety. What I really think we ought to do, though, is just get rid of this scarcity mentality that we have around race and identity. The scarcity mentality being that you can only be white, Black, Asian, Latino, or other. The scarcity mentality being that identifying as mixed takes away from the experiences of monoracial people. And overall, the mentality that your phenotype is your destiny. At the end of the day, I hope we are getting away from that mentality, especially when a conversation like this would really do nothing to materially better the lives of darker-skinned people. I have yet to see Sinners, but I am excited to see what Steinfeld brings into this role and how she leverages her own personal connection to this history into her performance. Optimistically, I do want to say that it is a big world out there. We have a lot of stories that have yet to be told, and many obscure stories that can still reverberate. It is pretty obvious that Hollywood does not mete out roles fairly to actors of different complexions and different races. But I do think that we still have to think more outside the box. I remember back when Solange's album A Seat at the Table dropped. Around that time, I went to a literary conference in Boston where I lived at the time. We actually had a separate breakout event at the writers' conference for self-identified writers of color. And of course, we got like a back room that had like no food and no water. That's a whole other story. But in the scope of conversations had at this writers of color meetup, the notion of having a seat at the table came up quite a bit. And I remember thinking, well, if we have currently one Black seat, one Latino seat, one Asian seat, and 17 white seats, adding a seat at the table doesn't really change the fundamental structure of things. I thought what we need to do is put a leaf in the table itself, a leaf in which writers of color in the publishing industry can have equity. So I just want to challenge us to reframe how we have some of these conversations about race and identity. I would like to think that everyone has a little bit of something to learn from everyone else. And of course, I hope that the discursive space for multiracial and biracial people even can expand in positive ways. Alright guys, that's the video. Thanks again for making it this far. Are you going to watch Sinners? Let me know in the comments. Also, let me know in the comments who you would have cast in this role if not Hailee Steinfeld. This is Hassan with the Diaspora Gothic channel. Remember to stay connected, stay rooted, and stay dramatic. Bye!
What this does say, though, is that because I am not any one particular thing, I exist more as a bridge than versus as a citizen of any particular racial or ethnic group. And there's advantages to being a bridge, obviously, where you can communicate messages from one group to the other, you can identify with multiple different places, and you get to enjoy the richness of each land to an extent. There's disadvantages, of course, for the exact same reason. You don't get to firmly be in any land. I love being Black. I love being Indian, and I don't want to give those spaces up. I don't want to give those communities up. I don't want to give those stories up. I don't want to give that history up or that culture. So for me, maybe my kids might feel differently, but yeah, I don't desire to be identified as just simply mixed and to not have roots and feet or whatever bridges have down in those cultures. It's making me like teary-eyed to even think about it because it matters to me. Yeah, it does. All right, now.